Welcome to American Dealmaker. After the episode, it's your turn. Welcome to the American Dealmaker podcast, where big ideas that push the envelope forward come to you, the Dealmakers. Startups based in San Francisco come to shake things up. I'm your host, Constance, founder and Dealmaker. And in today's episode, we have a special guest, mayoral candidate Daniel Lurie from San Francisco. And he's here to share with you, the Dealmakers, about his upcoming campaign for mayor of San Francisco. In today's episode, you'll be able to get the behind the scenes on what it takes to lead a campaign, the strategy, and how to communicate powerfully. After the episode, head on over to Twitter to deliberate. Daniel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And welcome to the Deal Room.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yes, amazing. I appreciate you doing this podcast. We are a newer podcast, and so support from, people who are early adopters means so much. And as a startup founder, I appreciate your background as a startup founder as well. And I think that our audience is going to really learn a lot today from your perspective. We met probably a month or two ago now.
Yeah, that sounds right.
At an event for your campaign, and the host of the event threw us into a podcast conversation, and so I'm so grateful that we're here in June and you were able to make it fit into your schedule. And you brought some team members here that were at the dinner as well. Hawkins is here, so it's just exciting to be able to see your campaign.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Let's get into it. So I would love for you to start off by sharing with our audience a little bit about your campaign philosophy and what your focus is for people who are maybe based in San Francisco. I think about it. So I've started up a few things. I started up Tipping Point Community in 2005. I helped launch a bid for Super Bowl 50 back in 2013. There was no entity in place, and actually starting and running a campaign from scratch is a little bit like a startup. In the early days, at least it was. Now we have a full team and we're off and running. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think the little things matter so much. And when you're starting up a new business, people are looking at you to see, can you execute? And it starts with something as simple as writing a thank you note, making sure you call somebody back on time. And I've always prided myself on doing the little things well. If you can do the little things well, then you can do the big things well. One thing I'm sure of is if you can't get the little things right, you're not going to get the big things right.
I love that. I think that that's incredible and something that really matters. A lot of times, whether you're a startup founder or leading in any type of leadership position, there's lots of things. So prioritizing the little things, I think, is an amazing lesson. So I'm a native to San Francisco as well. So I'd love to hear, did you always know growing up here in the city that this was a city that you wanted to change? Tell us about your journey to politics.
Born and raised here. My wife is not. She was raised in Seattle. I met her in New York City. But we're raising two young kids here. And I've always been proud to call San Francisco my home. I still am. One of the reasons I'm running, though, is just the direction that we're heading in leaves me worried that our kids and the people watching, their kids won't have that same sense of pride that I've always had. I didn't think, do I want to change the city? I just always knew that I wanted to be part of the community. I had 4 great influences in my parents and my step-parents that always instilled in me this sense that you got to take care of this city, that you got to love this city. So many good things have happened for my family here that you got to, give back. You got to be involved and engaged. And I learned that from my parents, my mom, my dad, from a very early age.
Amazing. Wow. I love that spirit of giving back, and I think that San Francisco is a small community, even though it's become so inundated by new tech developments. I'd love to hear, as someone growing up here, seeing how technology has influenced the city and coming from the background of a founder, tell me about if that differentiates you in your campaign from your opponents.
Yeah.
And, startup founders often think about competitive advantage. So tell us how you see that.
That's a great question. I believe I'm the only CEO in this race. I'm the only person that's actually started
and run a large-scale organization. I do think that's a competitive advantage, and I think it's something that people should take into account. You know, just with my experience running Tipping Point, growing it from 0 people to a $50 million a year organization. We've raised over $500 million. We've partnered with the business community, we've partnered with government, with nonprofits, obviously. I think you as a CEO and a founder and having scaled something, and also one thing I don't talk that much about that I think is really important, especially for founders to think about. Maybe they don't have to think about it in their early years, but like, what's your succession plan? How are you handing this off? You know, a lot of early stage founders are very good at starting stuff up, but are they good at managing it once it gets to scale? And are they good at handing it off when it needs to, hit hypergrowth? I'm proud that at Tipping Point, I've been able to hand it off to this incredible CEO. His name's Sam Cobbs. And we had a very thoughtful succession plan. He and I worked together for 2 years at Tipping Point together, and then so he was ready to take it on, and now he's taken it to new heights. And that's actually, as a founder, Tipping Points can always be sort of like my baby. I'm so incredibly proud of this CEO taking what we started in 2005 and help it continue to grow.
That's amazing. I think being able to instill the company's values within the company so that when you hand it off,
yes,
someone can continue that journey is really fantastic.
That's the true measure of a successful startup company. You got venture backers, they don't want you just to succeed, they want the company to be a long-term success. I was able to do that with Tipping Point.
That's amazing. I mean, this is all great information for founders watching, and I think that so many, their dream is to get to that point, and it's so important to remember that you need to be future thinking in
yes,
that way,
yes,
and be building in a way that is for a business purpose and not just for the singular vision. I'm curious to learn more about your inspiration, because you've had such an amazing journey up until this point and have been able to take on big challenges. So has there been any books that have been impactful for you?
Oh wow, I don't have a whole lot of time at this moment during the campaign to read, but I mean, for me, honestly, it was Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. I know that sounds like you set me up for that, but what he explained in that book, and I was reading that in around 2000, 2001, I'm not sure exactly when it came out, early 2000, just about how a few people can create huge change, whether it was a fashion movement or in movements, things always start with just a spark, right? That's how I thought about Tipping Point. I thought, okay, how can a few passionate, committed people create change and provide opportunities for every possible person in the Bay Area? I was raised with many opportunities. I acknowledge that, I embrace that, I love that, but then I wanted to make sure I pull as many people through those doors that have been open for me. I want to bring as many people through that as possible. And so Tipping Point, the book, is definitely one, by the way, that every startup founder should be reading. That's the book that I would recommend.
I love that. That was one of my favorite books. I read that while I was in high school.
Okay.
And
oh, now you're just dating me.
Oh gosh, I feel like I'm dating myself. Yeah, we're taking it back. But that's great, because maybe some people haven't come across it, and what I love about that concept is how ideas grow from a subculture to something mainstream, and the ripple effect. And so I'm sure you're thinking a lot about that in your speeches and in your campaign, communicating your vision and how to reach a mass audience. So
well, and he also not that it was the same book, but then in his future books he talked about the 10,000 hours and the time it takes to become an expert in something. I feel like I did that when it came to issues of tackling poverty during 15 years as CEO and then 4 as executive chair of Tipping Point. For me, you got to be committed, you got to be all in. That's just another example of where Gladwell helped synthesize what we kind of all know, but he just does such a great job explaining it.
Yeah, I love that. The focus and experience and the time that it takes is definitely a big piece of it, and keeping yourself focused during that time as well, to know that it'll lead you somewhere to excellence. As far as communication, and you must be an expert by now through communicating to employees, through communicating to audiences, a lot of startup founders are trying to become better communicators, to pitch to investors or pitch their product. Is there any advice that you can give to become a better communicator, or advice that the way you think about communication?
It's a great question. I feel like in certain settings, I've become an expert just from Tipping Point and then managing Super Bowl and having to get up in front of 32 NFL owners and pitch your city and win the rights to a game. I've had some wild experiences. I once did a speech at We Day, which is for teenagers who are giving back, and I spoke in the East Bay at the old Warriors Coliseum in front of 18,000 people, and so I was like, that's a lot of people. But then there's other places, I'm doing debates for the first time now in this mayor's race, and that's been fascinating and just another wild experience. I think one thing you gotta always just be ready to learn. Every stage is different. Every group that you're communicating with is different. For your employees, you gotta be authentic. You gotta be clear-eyed and have that vision mapped out. And at Tipping Point, when I was speaking to a general audience, you had to explain what you were trying to accomplish, bringing business leaders together with nonprofit leaders, and then pitching donors. We never took a government cent, not a dollar of government money out of the $500 million that we've spent. I had to really go and make sure that I was pitching donors and business leaders and saying, this is why the return on investment is so great if you give to Tipping Point. It really depends. You gotta be audience specific, but macro view of how you communicate. For me, what's always worked is when it hasn't worked, it's because I wasn't true to myself. You gotta be authentic, you gotta be clear, you gotta be concise. I've probably gone on too long in this answer. People need quick sound bites. The number one thing that I think everyone watching should always keep in mind is you gotta be true to yourself, and you gotta be authentic. And so when I'm able to do that, whether it was Tipping Point or Super Bowl or on the campaign trail, small rooms or in big rooms, if I show my true self, we win the day.
I love that. Amazing. Being true to yourself is huge.
Yeah.
And I think that's really empowering to know that through everything that you've learned, that's one of the keys.
Yeah. I mean, especially in politics, you got so many people with advice and counsel and competing priorities. As the next mayor of San Francisco, I'm gonna have to listen to everybody, and I want to listen to everybody. At some point, you're gonna have to make a decision. That's why you campaign, so people get to know who you are. If I'm able to just tell people about my values and be clear-eyed on where I want to take the city, and you communicate and you listen, I think people then will be willing to accept your decision.
Amazing. Wow. So again, staying true to your values and communicating that, whether it's someone inside your business or whether it's two people out on the street campaigning. And that brings me to my next question, which is, let's fast forward a year. As mayor of San Francisco, a year into the office, what does success look like for you?
A couple of really concrete things. We will have stood up 1,500 shelter beds, make sure that we've offered everybody a safe, dignified place to go indoors, so people will no longer resort to, nor will they be allowed to sleep on our streets. That's key. That we've instituted a culture of accountability at City Hall that just simply does not exist at this moment. We kind of see it in everything around us. These departments that I will be leading are currently being run like their own little fiefdoms. We're gonna make sure that we're all working together, that department heads are communicating with each other and communicating with me, and communicating, most importantly, with the residents of San Francisco. Right now, this goes back to the last question, people don't feel heard. There is not good communication, and that's what happens when you have a breakdown in leadership. And we all see it, we all know it, and that's why people are desperate for fresh ideas and leadership that's rooted in accountability. And so I will bring that to bear. We're going to make sure that we have clean and safe streets and a place for people to go indoors, so we no longer have so many people not only living on our streets but dying on our streets. We had 810 people die of overdose last year in San Francisco. It's shameful. We need to make sure that those that are struggling with addiction or struggling with mental health issues, that we have the beds. And so we're going to start building more mental health and drug treatment beds, so we have safe places for people to be taken.
Wow, that's so inspiring. I love that you were able to share that impact vision with us, and I would love to see that as well.
Yes, we all would.
So before I get to my last question, I want to ask our studio audience if they've got any questions.
Definitely. Do you have any plans on reviving the startup culture of San Francisco? Because it's always been the startup capital of the world, and we can see it dying a little lately. So do you have any plans on that?
Yes, well, first we have to embrace our business community and our startup community. Always. Like, we are the center of innovation, always have been, and we always should be. We've lost that a little bit. We've lost our mojo a little bit over the last few years. I came out with a plan to create a climate innovation hub just 2 weeks ago. Really excited to propose that, and that will be something that we do in our first 6 months, 12 months. We have 22 Salesforce towers worth of empty office space downtown. We have OpenAI just a block or two from where we're sitting right now. We have Meta, we have Google, we have UCSF, we have Cal and Stanford all right here. And so what I want to do is I want to marry those big companies. I want to marry that open office space, and I want us to be leading on this climate crisis and this climate emergency that we're facing. We should be the home of clean tech. We're leaking out investments to New York City, and frankly, that's really disappointing. I want those jobs. I want that tax revenue. I want that startup, innovative culture here in San Francisco, making sure that, when we're decarbonizing the planet, like, those ideas are originating here in San Francisco. I pride myself in knowing a lot of startup founders, a lot of business leaders. Like, I'm going to go out and recruit companies back to San Francisco. But first, our streets need to be clean and safe. People got to feel safe biking in protected bike lanes, riding Muni, and being able to drive safely. Like, we can't be ideological on how the transportation system, but let's make sure Muni's competitive to get people out of their combustible engines. Those people that are going to still drive, we're going to have drivers for a very long time. Let's make sure we have EV charging stations, like, on every street. The idea that we're falling so far behind on that is very frustrating to me. And so I'm going to go hard at recruiting businesses back, clean tech companies in particular with this climate innovation hub. But I'm going to be a mayor that goes out and recruits companies back to San Francisco.
I love that. Amazing. I think that's all for our studio audience. Yeah?
I just want to know how many questions you have there, but you haven't flipped it yet.
Yeah.
So I'm very confused.
These are, we've got some phrases that we like to say on the show, like, you got a deal, or, it's time to pivot, but I think that for this podcast, I wanted to stay focused on the campaign questions.
Okay, great.
But speaking, I'm just going to actually throw these up. Yeah. Okay. I want to ask the startup founder more things, but I think it's time to throw the confetti, because I'm so excited about your campaign.
Okay, great.
And
thank you.
It's amazing.
I need your support.
It's amazing to get to meet
Daniel
you.
Lurie, #1.
Yes.
There you go. Good.
The problem is that our listeners don't know how to get involved. So can you tell us
absolutely.
how we can get involved?
You can go to daniellurie.com and you can sign up to volunteer. We're at farmers markets every Saturday and Sunday, and actually Wednesday nights in the Castro. We are canvassing, knocking on doors, making phone calls. So if you go to daniellurie.com, there's a volunteer link. You can do that. And you can sign up to get a window sign. And especially for all of you influencers, please go to Instagram, Daniel Lurie SF. We just hit over 2,000 followers. We're starting to pick up some steam, and you can also go to Daniel Lurie in terms of just straight Daniel Lurie at X for my Twitter.
Amazing.
Yeah, we need more followers and to help us amplify our messages.
Okay, amazing. Yeah. Well, I think that solves our
it.
problem.
Thank you.
And this was an amazing conversation with you. I appreciate
Congrats
it so much.
on the new podcast. I'm honored to be one of your first guests, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate having you so much, and I think you shared so many valuable lessons for our audience, and it was just fascinating getting to talk to you, so appreciate it.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Okay, we're good.